Major Silas Thorne stood amidst the shattered remains of the invincible prismatic ages, his rifle leveled at the Archon's heart while the ship's alarms wailed in a tongue he didn't care to understand. Smoke from the dying crystals clouded the air, tasting of ozone and ancient pride. The ruler of 10,000 years stared up from the floor, her eyes wide with a realization that came too late. If you want to see how the soft-bodied Terrans turned a diplomatic trap into a masterclass in predatory efficiency, make sure to subscribe. Now, let's see where the hegemony went wrong. 6 hours earlier, the silver thermal flask had sat innocently on a polished obsidian table, its surface scratched and utterly out of place. Commander Elias Thorne had placed it there as a gesture of Terran hospitality, a simple container for hot coffee. To High Exarch Kalen, the object was a symbol of everything wrong with the newcomers. It was crude, metallic, and relied on primitive vacuum insulation rather than molecular temperature locking. The Exarch hadn't even touched it. Archon Vespera watched the summit from her throne, her long-lived mind cataloging the Terrans as a biological curiosity. They were soft. They lived for barely a century. Their technology relied on the violent combustion of chemicals and the crude manipulation of magnetism. Beside her, the hegemony leaders shared a collective, silent amusement. They had spent 10 millennia perfecting the art of the Solarian peace, a stagnation they mistook for perfection. The Terrans, by contrast, seemed like children playing with matches in a room full of gunpowder. But when Commander Elias spoke of border disputes and the rights of the Terra Nova colonies, his voice didn't tremble. It had a steady, rhythmic quality that Vespera found unsettling. It was the sound of a species that had never known the luxury of a 10,000-year safety net. Then came the mistake. Kalen, driven by a need to show these short-lived creatures their place, signaled the Aegis guards. The arrest was swift. The Terran diplomats were led away to the unbreakable crystal spires of the prison tier. Kalen laughed as the cell doors hummed shut, dismissing the legends of human elite warriors as bedtime stories meant to frighten small moons. He didn't notice that Elias had left the silver flask behind on the table, a lone witness to the Archon's hesitation. Deep in the void, aboard the stealth-shrouded Umbra Wraith, Silas Thorne watched the thermal signature of the palace pulse. He didn't need a diplomatic clearance to know his brother was in trouble. He only needed the kinetic breach charges. The hegemony's sensors were designed to detect high-energy signatures, warp field fluctuations, and tachyon bleeds. They were not looking for a dirty hunk of lead and carbon fiber moving at silent, cold velocities. The Wraith slipped through the Aegis like a needle through silk. The Luminari guards were still discussing the humans' quaint biology. When the first bulkhead didn't just open, it ceased to exist in a spray of jagged shrapnel. The breach was a physical scream of metal. Vespera watched through the palace's neural link as her elite guards, beings of light and centuries of martial training, were systematically extinguished by shadows that moved with a predatory, grinding efficiency. The Terrans didn't use elegant energy blades or honorable dueling protocols. They used the environment. They used gravity. They used the fact that a soft body can still deliver a hard blow. The Archon felt a tremor in the crystal floor, a vibration that shouldn't exist in the heart of Aethelgard. It was the rhythmic thud of boots. Her advisors scrambled, their long-lived composure fracturing into a panicked mess of high-pitched chirps and frantic sensor sweeps. "They are bypassing the prismatic gates," Kalen hissed, his hands trembling. "They aren't hacking the code, they're just breaking the hinges." Silence fell. Then the final door to the throne room didn't slide open. It was kicked from its track. And now, in the wreckage of her own invincibility, Vespera looked into the eyes of Major Silas Thorne. He didn't look like a barbarian, he looked like a professional. The rifle leveled at her heart was steady, held by hands that knew exactly how much pressure was required to end a 10,000-year reign. The wailing alarms felt small compared to the silence of the man in the black tactical suit. Silas lowered the weapon just an inch, his gaze shifting to the silver thermal flask still sitting on the obsidian table. He reached out, his gloved fingers wrapping around the metal. It looked even more primitive now, scorched by the heat of the breach, yet it remained unbroken. "My brother offers peace," Silas said, his voice a low rasp that carried more weight than any hegemony decree. "I offer a demonstration. Don't make me give you a second one." He turned, gesturing for the freed Elias to follow. They walked out through the ruin of the prismatic ages, leaving the hegemony's leaders standing in the debris of their own arrogance. Bespera didn't call for the guards. She knew there were none left to answer. Weeks later, the crystal spires of Ethelgard were quiet once more, but the atmosphere had changed. The Archon sat at the same obsidian table, though the room now felt colder, larger. She reached out and touched the object Silas had left behind, the silver thermal flask. It was a crude thing, a relic of a species that lived in a constant state of adaptation, because they didn't have the luxury of time. She picked it up, feeling the weight of the metal. It was no longer a symbol of primitive hospitality. It was a reminder of the predator that lived behind the human smile. Bespera unscrewed the cap and took a slow, deliberate drink of the bitter Terran liquid inside. It was still hot. Does true power come from the technology we build, or the will that drives us to break it? Join us tomorrow as we explore more legends from the frontier of Terra Nova.